Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little different. You're not slipping into a battlefield, dodging arrows in ancient Sparta, or running from Roman tax collectors. No, tonight you're reclining on a low couch, your tunic rumpled, and your cup filled with something dark, rich, and unexpectedly medicinal. This is not a party, it's your doctor's appointment. You're the patient in a Greek symposium, and your prescription comes in ceramic goblets, not paper envelopes. The air smells of resin and ripe grapes. Soft music thrums in the background, and someone's already snoring in the corner. You probably won't survive this healing session without a bit of wooziness, or at least a minor headache, but it turns out that might just be the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? I love knowing who's drifting off all around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just entered what might be called Dionysus's clinic, not that you're walking into a marble-pillared hospital or anything. No, you're walking into a dim and incense-laced room where men are reclining on couches and sipping diluted wine like it's both celebration and ceremony. There's laughter low and slow, and a curious sense that every cup is more than a drink. It's a dose. In ancient Greece, wine wasn't simply fermented grapes in a jug. It was health in liquid form. A divine elixir. The blood of Dionysus, if you ask the poets. And tonight, you're told it's going to make you better. Of course you're skeptical. Your throat hurts. Your stomach feels like it's plotting something sinister. And frankly, the last time you drank wine this early in the day, you ended up singing about goats, loudly, in public. But your host, let's call him Philomenos, assures you that this is different. This is healing wine, sourced from the slopes of Mount Parnassus, stirred with sacred spring water, blessed by a wandering priest who may or may not have also blessed his goat. The point is, it's good for you. You take your first sip, it's strong, not the fruity swill you expected, but layered and earthy with a hint of bitterness that coats your tongue like medicine, which technically it is, or was. Depending on how much you trust Philomenos' credentials, he claims he once saw Hippocrates from a distance. In truth, many Greeks genuinely believed wine held healing power, not just for the soul, though definitely that, but for the body. A cut, dabe some wine. A cough, gargle a little diluted vintage. A broken heart, that one requires several cups and maybe a flute player. You glance around the room. One man is reclining with a bandaged knee, sipping slowly. Another is quietly rubbing wine on his temples, muttering something about headaches and gods. The air is thick with the strange certainty that Dionysus, the god of wine ritual madness, and yes, healing, wants you to feel better, or at least to stop complaining. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly saw wine as a medicine or simply wrapped their drinking habits in spiritual excuses. But to the people in this room, there's no question. Wine is life. Wine is balance. Wine is apparently the cure for everything from toothaches to treachery. You're handed a second cup lighter, this time more diluted. Your host explains the importance of mixing. Undiluted wine is barbaric, dangerous, even deranged. The proper crater-to-water ratio must be followed, or well, you might as well be Persian, and no one here wants that. as the wine warms your chest, you realize something peculiar. You do feel better. Not healed exactly, but calmer, softer. Your headache, which had been poking around behind your eyes like an annoyed cicada, has decided to nap. Your stomach, formerly in a riotous mood, now murmurs in contentment. Coincidence, possibly, but maybe there's something to this fermented philosophy after all. You settle back the pillow behind your neck a little too scratchy to be comfortable and listen as the men begin debating whether Dionysus once raised the dead with wine. One man swears by it. Another says that was Orpheus, not Dionysus. Someone else interrupts to say it doesn't matter. What matters is that wine has spirit, and that spirit heals. Another sip, another layer of calm. Someone begins playing a reed pipe in the corner, and suddenly the room feels less like a sick ward and more like a dream. You're not sure if you're being cured or enchanted, possibly both. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you think to yourself, maybe Dionysus had it right. Maybe healing isn't always sharp tools and bitter pills. Maybe sometimes it's warmth laughter and the soft swirl of red in a clay cup. Just don't ask what's in cup number 4. That's the one they reserve for emotional revelations and very bad poetry. You wake slowly, still reclined, still wrapped in that lazy haze, and for a moment you can't remember if you're in a clinic, a banquet, or a dream. Then you smell it. That unmistakable aroma, fermented grape, sun-warmed terracotta, and something faintly herbal. And you remember? You're not in a hospital bed. You're at the symposium, and your medicine is wine. Someone offers you a slice of bread. It's hard dry clearly from yesterday. You chew anyway, mostly to anchor yourself. Across the room, Philomenos is swirling a fresh cup, lecturing his neighbors about how wine isn't just a drink, it's a divine instrument, not metaphorically, literally. A gift from the gods with healing properties woven into its very nature. You blink, healing, yes, that's what they keep saying. The Greeks believed wine came from Dionysus, son of Zeus, born from fire and raised in chaos, a god of paradoxes, joy and madness, fertility and death, and yes, illness and healing. Where Dionysus walked, vines grew. Where he smiled, people drank. And when people drank, they felt better, or at least louder. You wonder how that logic held up at the temple. Turns out quite well. Temples of Asclepius. The god of medicine often included sacred groves and quiet courtyards, places for introspection, ritual cleansing, and controlled sipping. Offerings of wine were left at his altars, not just as gifts, but as requests. A cup of wine poured for health, one gulped for dreams, another whispered over by a priest for a specific ache. It was a transaction, give, receive, sip, heal. You walk with Philomenos into the colonnaded garden. He gestures to a fig tree and says, even the bark knows wine is holy. You stare at the bark. It looks like bark. He taps it gently. Wine flows like blood. Dionysus bled wine for us. You drink and you share in him. You nod slowly, unsure whether this is theology medicine or light drunkenness. And it's not just Dionysus. Other gods chime in too. Apollo, god of reason and healing, was no stranger to wine rituals. In Delphi, worshippers would combine prophetic trances with light wine intoxication. The idea was simple wine softened the veil between the physical and the divine. just enough for the gods to peek through, or for you to hallucinate solutions to your sore throat. Mainstream historians agree that wine was indeed used medicinally across Greek society, sometimes boiled with herbs, sometimes fermented with resin, sometimes left to age into sharp-tongued vinegar. But how much of that was genuine pharmacology versus hopeful ritual? That's where the arguments begin. Scholars still debate whether the Greeks believed wine healed or simply hoped it did while enjoying the side effects. Philomenos has no doubt, though. He passes you another cup lighter, this time spiced with what smells like rosemary and fennel. He calls it a cooling mixture, meant to lower fevers and balance your inner winds. You sip. It tastes like you're drinking your grandmother's herb garden, but oddly, you don't hate it. The Greeks were obsessed with balance, not just in the life advice sense, but in their medicine. The human body, according to Hippocratic tradition, was a stew of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant harmony between them. Illness and imbalance, and guess what could nudge the stew back into shape? Wine. In the right dose, of course. They even had wine for different seasons. In winter, they drank it warm and thick, often mixed with honey and herbs. In summer, they diluted it further, cool and sour like a proto-Gatorade. It wasn't just about pleasure. It was about adjustment, keeping your internal climate in tune with the world outside. One scroll from a physician named Menesithius flatly states, wine is most useful to mankind, both as food and as medicine. He then goes on to describe, when not to use it, fevers, head wounds, and certain disturbances of the mind. Apparently, even ancient doctors knew the risks of drinking on an empty skull. But to the average citizen, wine was a cure-all. You hear a woman down the hall saying she mixed her wine with vinegar and fig sap to soothe her stomach. Another claims it fixed her son's ear infection, though it also may have worsened his singing voice. Philomenos leans close, eyes twinkling. You know why it works, he whispers. Because it carries the god's breath. Every sip a whisper of healing. You smile politely. It's either nonsense or poetry or both. But the warmth in your chest has returned and your headache hasn't. So maybe that whisper's doing its job. And then comes the twist. A man enters a stumbling, slightly muttering about dreams and messages. He claims he drank wine at a shrine and saw Asclepius in a dream who told him to sleep under a plane tree for 3 nights and his gout would vanish. Did it work? Of course, he says, gesturing proudly at his still swollen foot. You're not sure whether to laugh or applaud. It's absurd. And it's ancient medicine, because in Greece, wine wasn't just medicine, it was messenger, a medium between you and whatever force might make things better. Logic. Sometimes. Ritual. Always. Hope. Absolutely. You recline again, letting the herbs settle in your stomach, the wine soften your limbs. Your symptoms aren't gone, but your dread about them is. You feel, for lack of a better word, held, not by science, not by faith, but by something in between. And as the sky darkens outside and another cup is passed your way, you realize something strange. You don't need to be completely cured tonight. You just need to feel like you could be. You're halfway through your 3rd cup when the room shifts, or maybe it's your balance. Hard to say. But your cheeks feel warm, your limbs are humming, and Philomenos is grinning at you like a cat who just explained algebra to a fish. Across from you, someone is sketching a crude drawing of Dionysus with goat legs. He wasn't half goat, you murmur. That's Pan. But the artist just nods solemnly and dribbles more wine onto the table as ink. Welcome to the divine prescription. Because while modern folks swallow ibuprofen and hope for the best in ancient Greece, they look to Dionysus, god of wine theater and controlled madness. It wasn't just drunken revelry, it was ritual intoxication, purposeful, structured, sometimes even sacred. And tonight you're about to meet the god himself, or at least feel like you have. Dionysus was more than a fun party guest. He was a mythological force, a god born twice. First from Semele, a mortal, then again from Zeus's thigh, long story, best told by candlelight and mild inebriation. His rebirth made him both human and divine, the perfect bridge between mortals and mysteries. And because his nature was fluid, so were his gifts. Wine didn't just loosen the body, it loosened the spirit. It dissolved social barriers, unleashed repressed truths, and yes, healed hidden pains. At least that's what Dionysus's followers believed. You weren't just drinking to forget, you were drinking to see. Someone recites a fragment of Euripides' Bacchae, where the chorus sings of Dionysus. He gives us good cheer, sleep from pain, and forgetfulness of every ill. You lean back. The room breathes in unison. This is where medicine meets myth, and it's a wild ride. The cult of Dionysus, known for ecstatic rites and midnight processions, believed in wine's power to cleanse the soul. Followers danced, shouted, wept, and collapsed under the weight of their own suppressed emotions. It looked chaotic, but to them it was healing. Catharsis before Freud, spiritual detox before yoga. Historians still argue whether these rituals were therapeutic or just socially sanctioned outbursts. But either way, people left those rites changed, sometimes calmer, sometimes broken, occasionally very muddy. Your host claps his hands, and a flute player strikes up a haunting tune. It wobbles through the air like incense. He tells you the story of a woman cured of lifelong sadness after participating in the Dionysian mysteries. She wept for hours, laughed uncontrollably. Then for the first time in decades, she slept peacefully, all because she danced with Dionysus. Of course, there are skeptics. A balding philosopher in the corner scoffs. That's not medicine, it's performance. He swirls his wine and mutters about illusion and placebo. You suspect he's just upset. No one asked him to dance. Still, you can't ignore the mood. There's something undeniably different about this room. Softer, safer. A place where pain can unfold without shame. Where people sip, slowly speak honestly, and strangely heal. You ask if this is normal. Philomenos chuckles. Normal, no. But it's necessary. He explains how certain festivals, like the Anthesteria, a spring celebration of Dionysus, included sacred drinking contests, not for glory, not for debauchery, but to honor the divine. Participants believed each sip brought them closer to the god, and in that closeness they found relief from grief, from fear, from the unbearable weight of being human. You think of modern support groups, therapy circles, breathwork retreats. Replace the crater with a water bottle and the incense with lavender oil, and you're not far off. Even medical texts backed some of it. The great physician Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, wrote that wine is an appropriate article for mankind, both for the healthy body and for the ailing man. He even recommended specific types for specific ailments, strong reds for lethargy, light whites for digestion, and dry wines for fever. Basically, a liquid pharmacy. But Dionysus took it further. His gift wasn't just chemical, it was emotional liberation. You think of your own burdens, the ones you've stuffed into quiet corners, the ones you carry like ancient urns, heavy, fragile, and leaking sometimes. And here with grape juice and myth in equal measure, they feel lighter. A man across the room stands and declares he has finally forgiven his brother for stealing his sandals 15 years ago. The room erupts in laughter and applause. Then someone hugs him, just like that. He sits down, tearful, and drinks another sip. You're beginning to understand. Wine for the Greeks wasn't just about taste or texture. It was about release. It was a solvent for grief, a balm for shame, a key to unlock emotional truth. You weren't just drinking to dull the pain. You were drinking to name it, and by naming it, to let it go. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some philosophers warned that wine eroded reason and led to chaos. The Stoics in particular saw indulgence as weakness. Control your emotions, they barked. Don't outsource your soul to a grape. And yet, here you are, outsourced, slightly spinning, but undeniably softened. As the room settles into low murmurs and flickering torchlight, Philomenos raises a final toast for the night. To Dionysus, doctor of souls, he says. Everyone drinks, even the philosopher. You lean back and close your eyes. The warmth in your chest is no longer just wine. It's something older, deeper, maybe even divine. Morning comes slowly bleeding in through the narrow windows, like diluted honey. The torchlight's gone, the laughter faded, and the flute lies silent on the floor. You sit up, groaning softly, unsure if your joints ache from the cold marble bench or from too much spiritual healing. Philomenos is already awake, humming to himself as he ladles water into a wide ceramic bowl. The symposium may be over, but your treatment just beginning. Because now you're meeting the real doctor, a physician, not a poet. And he's not carrying herbs or incense. He's carrying a crater. You blink? Isn't that the big bowl for mixing wine? Exactly. Because in ancient Greece, the doctor and the vintner weren't all that different. Your new healer's name is Mekon. He wears a worn cheat in hands, stained from either ink or berries you can't tell, and he greets you with the solemn air of someone who thinks sneezing is a moral failing. He glances at your eyes, your posture, the way you're holding your stomach. Too much red, he mutters. We'll try something drier. And before you can object, he begins pouring. A measured ratio, 2 parts water, 1 part wine, stirred slowly in the crater. This isn't a toast. This is treatment. You sip. It's cool, slightly sharp, with a bite of resin and a whiff of rosemary. He watches you closely like he's taking notes you can't see. Your breath smells warm, he says, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. You're holding heat in your liver. You have no idea what that means. But Mekon does. And according to him, your symptoms, a mild headache, slight nausea, that foggy just out of dream feeling, indicate a temporary imbalance in your inner constitution. You're leaning too far toward the choleric, apparently. Too much fire, too much bile. He opens a scroll and points to a diagram that looks like someone spilled soup onto a face. It's a drawing of the 4 humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and he's confident your current state needs cooling, drying, and diluting. The solution wine, of course, but not just any wine. You're learning now that wine was more than a beverage. It was a prescribed substance. Medical scrolls from Hippocrates and later Galen outline which wines suited which ailments. Young wines for cleansing, aged wines for binding, reds for cold temperaments, whites for hot conditions. There was a system, half science, half sorcery, and wine was at its center. One record from the 5th century BCE lists wine alongside remedies like honey fig leaves and crushed oyster shells. Another recommends boiling wine with rue and myrrh to treat intestinal parasites. You grimace at the thought. Mekon chuckles. Wine carries the virtues of what it touches, he explains. So we mix it with herbs, roots, even minerals. The right blend draws out the bad, strengthens the good. Historians still argue how effective these mixtures really were. Some believe that alcohol acted as a disinfectant, genuinely reducing bacterial load in water or on wounds. Others say the real benefit was psychosomatic ritual comfort wrapped in the taste of familiarity. But no one disputes this. The Greeks saw wine as multifunctional, a cleanser, a sedative, a carrier of herbal properties, even a diagnostic tool. Mekon proves this when he asks you to sniff a different wine, this one thick and musky. You recoil. He nods. Spleen is out of tune. Apparently your body's reaction to certain scents and sips could reveal internal imbalances. One man's gag reflex meant stomach phlegm. Another's aversion to sweetness hinted at melancholy. The wine wasn't just the medicine, it was the mirror, and the dosage carefully calibrated. Too little and nothing happens. Too much and you're singing love songs to a garden statue. The ideal dose. Just enough to soften the edges of pain, as Galen once wrote, without dulling the senses entirely. You sip slowly. The warmth spreads, but it doesn't scorch. Your head clears, your breath steadies. Is this healing, or is it just hydration with perks? Mekon begins preparing another blend this time, with vinegar and mint. It's for a man complaining of joint stiffness. This will ease his sinews, he says. You're skeptical, but moments later the man is stretching like a cat, smiling through cracked teeth. Nearby a boy is being treated for a chest cold. He's inhaling steam from wine boiled with pine resin. The air smells sharp and forest thick. His mother hums a low song. Even the sound feels medicinal. You glance around. No scalpels, no stitches, just clay cups, herb steam, and stories. Medicine here is less about intervention and more about invitation to rest, to reflect, to let go. Your mind wanders to modern pharmacies, the fluorescent lights, the silent queuing, the sense that healing is mechanical, chemical, hurried. And here you feel seen, listened to. Whether the wine truly cures your liver or whether the ritual simply tells your body it's safe to heal, you're not sure, but you believe in it. Just a little. Philomenos reappears holding a slice of goat cheese and a smirk. Told you wine was a gift, he says. You just needed the right dose. You raise your cup not in toast, but in thanks. Because today, your doctor didn't give you pills or potions. He gave you a moment. And maybe that's what healing looks like, quiet, slow, and sipped. You're back on your feet now, or at least wobbling toward upright, and Mekon gives you a stern look before handing over another cup. Drink this slowly, he says. 3 sips before sun passes the olive tree. You look outside. There are 5 olive trees. You nod solemnly anyway. This cup is different. lighter, almost floral, and it's been mixed with fresh spring water cooled in a clay jug buried halfway in the earth. You'd never think of wine as a hydrating beverage, but here it's practically a tonic, a formula, a balance. Because in Greece, wine wasn't meant to be drunk straight. To pour unmixed wine into your cup, called a kratos, was not just bad manners. It was barbaric, uncivilized. You might as well howl at the moon and start sacrificing goats in your neighbor's yard. Greeks believed in balance, especially when it came to alcohol. Dilution was everything. At a typical symposium, wine was mixed in a crater, a wide decorated vessel, and then ladled into smaller cups. Ratios mattered. 3 parts water to 1 part wine was ideal. 2 to 1 for those seeking a deeper clarity, as Philomenos puts it, pouring just a tad more wine into his cup when Mekon isn't looking. You learn that different mixing styles served different purposes. Lighter mixes for daytime aches, stronger for nighttime emotional ailments. Some were even mixed with seawater for specific complaints, especially for the sluggish of mind. You try not to take offense when someone offers you a salty cup and a raised eyebrow. This wasn't random. It was medicine. The mixing of wine was a therapeutic art overseen by the symposiarch, the wine master of the evening part, bartender part, wellness coach. His job, keep the drinking measured. Ensure no one slips from spiritually elevated to accidentally wrestling the dinnerware. And there were rules. 1st cup for health, 2nd cup for pleasure, 3rd cup for sleep, 4th. That's when things start getting philosophical and usually regrettable. You start to see why mixing mattered. Pure wine was seen as too fiery, too harsh. It could unbalance your inner humors and unhinge your judgment. But properly mixed, it was a bridge between body and soul, between logic and emotion, between medicine and myth. You remember what Mekon said earlier, wine carries the virtues of what it touches. So when it's blended with cool spring water, it becomes gentle, grounding, even restorative. And when it's infused with herbs, thyme, marjoram, sometimes even poppy, it becomes something else entirely. A potion, a remedy, a story you're meant to drink. One elderly man describes how his wife used to mix sweet red wine with cinnamon bark and figs when he had trouble sleeping. She'd warm it slightly over embers and whisper a prayer to Hygieia, the goddess of good health. Worked better than counting sheep, he says with a smile. Then he sighs and sips again, slower this time. Historians agree that wine's role in Greek health culture was deeply tied to its flexibility. It could be a drink, a disinfectant, a delivery method for herbs. But most of all, it was a social medicine shared, debated, ritualized, and its dilution wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Philomenos explains it best. The barbarians drink wine raw, he says, wrinkling his nose. It burns the mind. But we refine it. We tame it. We make it speak to the body. And then with great ceremony, he adds a single drop of honey into your cup. For sweetness, he says, and to remind you healing should never be bitter for too long. You sip. It's perfect. The warmth is there, but it doesn't bite. The taste lingers just long enough, and as the afternoon sun filters through olive branches, you feel balanced, not buzzed, not tired, just present. It's not lost on you that water by itself would have hydrated. Herbs alone might have calmed your belly. But this drink, this blend, has become more than its parts. It's ceremony. It's care. It's centuries of tradition poured into a clay cup. And maybe that's what makes it healing. Not just what it contains, but how it's offered. As you finish the last sip, Mikon claps your shoulder and says, "You're not cured yet, but you're listening now." You don't know if he means your ears or your heart, but you nod, because tonight you've learned that the Greeks didn't just drink wine. They crafted it, they listened to it, they trusted it, and in its mixture of flavor, water, and intention, they found a medicine that could sometimes work. You're reclining again, different room, same rhythm. This time, there's a slight breeze coming through the doorway, carrying the scent of olives, wet clay, and crushed thyme. Philomenos has returned with a grin, a fresh cup, and the kind of enthusiasm only someone with a questionable medical license and an amphora of red wine could muster. Today, he says, we toast your spleen. You pause. Your spleen. Yes, he insists. That little sack of melancholy. We must cheer it up. Welcome to ancient Greek internal medicine, where every organ had a personality and every mood had an origin story, usually somewhere deep in your viscera. And the spleen, it was the brooding artist of your insides. If you felt gloomy, fatigued, or weighted by shadows, it was probably your spleen throwing a fit. The solution wine, of course, specifically red wine, warm, dry, and gently astringent. Philomenos explains that red wine was believed to thin the blood, invigorate the senses, and lift melancholia. What the Greeks called melancholia literally meant black bile, the humor produced by the spleen. If your spleen was hoarding this tarry emotion, you'd be sluggish, sad, and full of sighs. So the Greeks had a plan: thin it out, lighten the mood, make the spleen feel appreciated, preferably with something aged tannic, and served in a cup painted with dancing satyrs. You take a sip. The wine is darker this time, with a bite of oak and a finish that hints at dried herbs and crushed pomegranate seeds. You weren't expecting depth, but here it is, tart and bold, like your spleen's personal pep talk. Philomenos starts pacing. You see, he says, the ancients understood that wine wasn't only about the body. It was about the balance of feeling. A man who broods too long invites illness, but a man who sips and sings, he heals. There's logic in it, of a sort. Many Greek physicians wrote about wine as a mood adjuster. Galen, for instance, recommended wine to those suffering from despondency as long as it was properly diluted and given with calm surroundings. No wild parties, no raucous flutes, just soft, light, warm words, and a cup or two of carefully selected cheer. One woman nearby claims her brother's episodes of staring into the sea for days were cured by daily doses of honeyed wine poetry and an especially empathetic goat. He named the goat Joy, she adds with a shrug. You believe her? Historians still debate how much these treatments actually worked, of course. There's evidence that moderate alcohol consumption can affect neurotransmitters, relax tense muscles, and momentarily lift mood. But did the Greeks know this? Probably not. Yet somehow, intuitively, they grasped the link between emotion and the body, between sorrow and sluggishness, joy and vitality. You're starting to feel it now, that subtle shift. Not a buzz, not even a glow, but a lightness behind the eyes. A breath that doesn't catch. A sensation that something inside has stopped sulking and started swaying gently. Philomenos nods like a proud parent. Your spleen is smiling, he says. And then he offers you a taste of something sweeter, a rosé-colored wine infused with hyacinth and pine honey. For your lungs, he explains, melancholy can linger there too. You sip. It's floral, silky like spring, wrapped in silk. You exhale slowly and notice how even your sigh feels lighter. Nearby, someone sings softly. It's a tune about Dionysus again. This one tells of how he found a grieving boy in the woods and taught him to laugh again one grape at a time. True story, someone whispers. You believe them too, because in this world, wine doesn't just flow through your veins. It travels through your spirit. It speaks to your stuck places, the corners of grief, the damp hollows of the soul, and it taps gently until they open, even if just a little. Of course, the Greeks didn't ignore moderation. They warned of wine's dangers. A melancholic man who drank too much might swing to mania. Too much sweetness, and the spleen might swell with joy and forget its place. There were scrolls filled with charts, warnings, and the occasional passive-aggressive poem about drinking like a donkey. But they always came back to this truth: a little wine at the right time with the right company could bring balance. Balance not just of humors, but of the soul. You stretch your legs, someone places a cool cloth on your forehead, not because you're feverish, just because it feels good. The sun leans through the doorway like a lazy cat. Your spleen peaceful, and your mind somewhere between ancient myth and modern sense, between laughter and quiet, between bitterness and bloom. Philomenos pours one last splash, winks and says, one more for the road, but not too far. Your soul's only just starting to walk again. You sip and smile. You awaken in the shade of an olive tree, half covered in your hymation, and wholly unsure how you got here. Philomenos insists you walked like a philosophical turtle, but you're suspicious. Still, you're feeling better, lighter, like your spleen, liver, and whatever other moody organ the Greeks worried about have finally agreed to stop arguing. Then Mycon returns not with a cup, but with a bowl of wine. He holds it beneath your nose and instructs, breathe in. You do. It's sharp and slightly sour with a floral edge and a kick of vinegar. You nearly sneeze. Good, see, he says, as if your reaction has confirmed everything. You're responsive. Responsive to what? Apparently your scent memory, your temperament, your breath temperature, and the clarity of your voice. You've just undergone a diagnostic technique as old as Pythagoras' wine aromatherapy, or as Mycon calls it, sniff and sense. In ancient Greece, the nose knew. Greek physicians often gauged a patient's condition by their breath and reaction to specific scents, especially wine. The idea was that your body's inner state could be reflected through how you responded to different types of wine, sweet, sharp, dry, herbal, or spiritually aggressive, as Philomenos claims of one especially pungent red. You're given another bowl. This one's deeper, darker. The scent hits your nose and goes straight to your chest, like you just inhaled a library made of plums and candle smoke. Mycon watches your eyes. Sorrow, he mutters, but only a shadow. You start to ask what that means, but he waves you off and points to your skin. Another patient is having wine dabbed along his temples and behind his ears. Not for vanity, for diagnosis. Apparently, if the skin absorbs too quickly, it's thirsty. If it reddens, it's reactive. If it stays cool, your inner fire is low. It all sounds a bit dramatic, but when he dabs some on your wrist, you do feel a slight shift, cooling, tingly, calming. The Greeks weren't just sipping wine, they were observing it how it felt on the skin in the nostrils, even how it echoed in the breath. And they believed that scent could reveal the unseen. Historians still argue whether this was a legitimate medical tool or just an elaborate guessing game, but even modern science acknowledges the connection between scent and memory mood and even early signs of illness. So maybe Mekon was onto something in his sandal-footed, grape-scented way. You're now guided to a low bench beside a fig tree. Mekon hands you a small cloth soaked in wine and crushed mint. Hold to your forehead, he says. You do. The world cools. Philomenos joins with a grin. We used to use that for battlefield panic, he says. Calmed the nerves, smelled better than the soldiers. And it wasn't just about smell. Wine was also used as a mouth rinse, especially after meals, to clear away bad thoughts and worse breath. Vinegary wines were favored for this a kind of ancient Listerine with a Dionysian twist. You're offered a rinse which is bracing enough to make you momentarily question your whole life. Spits out sadness, Philomenos quips. And garlic. It's starting to become clear for the Greeks. Wine wasn't just internal medicine. It was interactive, tasted, sniffed, dabbed, swirled. A tool for sensing imbalance, revealing temperament, even sparking emotional confessions. One older woman, a widow you think, leans over and tells you that when she was grieving, a physician gave her a wine scented with lavender and myrrh. I cried for 3 nights, she says softly. But then I stopped. She still keeps a jar of that wine in her room, just to smell, just to remember. That's what wine could do. Even if the diagnosis was vague, even if the inner winds Mekon keeps referencing remain medically elusive, what mattered was the ritual. The act of being seen, of being tested gently, of feeling cared for. You begin to understand that healing in this world didn't always mean curing. Sometimes it meant noticing, feeling, naming, allowing. You close your eyes again and inhale the soft vapor of wine and time, your thoughts quiet, your shoulders lower. And for a moment, your body tells you something without words. You're okay. Not perfect, not cured, but seen, balanced, maybe even healing. The next treatment isn't something you drink, sniff, or swirl in your mouth. It's something you feel cold, sticky, and soaking through the linen bandage that Mekon is wrapping around your scraped knee. Yes, the wine is external now. Hold still, he murmurs. We're going to let the grapes do the talking. You try not to flinch as the cloth freshly dipped in diluted wine tightens around your skin. The scent is sharp, more vinegar than vineyard, and you're suddenly aware of how universal wine has become in your recovery. From inside your body to outside, it seems the Greeks had every intention of turning you into a walking amphora. Wine as first aid might sound like a rustic myth, but it was absolutely a thing. In fact, one of its earliest documented uses was as a wound cleanser and antiseptic long before the word existed. Hippocrates himself recommended wine to clean ulcers and injuries. The reasoning it dried the wound, prevented rot, and supposedly restored balance to disturbed tissues. You're not sure your knee is interested in balance. It just wants to stop stinging. Philomenos pats your shoulder. Grape gods heal all, he says cheerfully. You eye the jug it came from, aged, dented, and slightly sticky on the sides. There's something comforting about it, like a family heirloom passed down through generations of clumsy cousins. Nearby, a young boy has his hands soaked in wine after touching something suspicious near the market. His mother mutters a prayer while Mikon ladles warm wine across the boy's fingers. It's not exactly a sterile hospital, but there's a sense of order, of purpose. The wine isn't just symbolic, it's functional. And as the warmth seeps into your knee, you begin to believe it. Somewhere in the courtyard, another treatment unfolds. A woman lies on a mat, her chest wrapped in wine-soaked linen and crushed rosemary. She's recovering from what Mikon calls a lung chill, and the fumes are meant to soothe. She looks half asleep. You envy her? Philomenos tells you that wine was used topically for all kinds of ailments, sprains, sore joints, rashes, even fevers. The idea was that wine, especially when warm and slightly sour, could draw out impurities and seal up unwanted dampness. Think of it as ancient Greek icy hot, but smellier. Historians still argue whether the wine itself was the active ingredient or if it was just cleaner than the water available. Probably both. Wine had low bacterial content thanks to its alcohol and acidity. So yes, it may have worked not because Dionysus kissed it, but because it was less likely to introduce new germs into an open cut. Still, Philomenos insists on the divine. It stings because it's chasing away the bad spirits, he whispers as you wince. You're not convinced, but you appreciate the flair. As your bandage dries, Mikon suggests a wine compress for your temples. You've been thinking too much, he says. You want to argue, but your brain is quietly trying to nap. He soaks a strip of cloth in chilled wine infused with bay leaf and gently places it over your forehead. The effect is immediate, a breath of coolness, followed by an odd floating sensation, as though your thoughts have gone out to look at the sea. You don't know whether to credit the wine or the silence, but either way, your mind stops racing. Across the courtyard, another ritual unfolds. A woman dips a thread into a bowl of strong red wine and ties it around her wrist. To ward off the evil eye, she says, and because it smells nice. You chuckle. The line between medical and mystical is always thin here. That dual purpose, the practical and the spiritual, is something the Greeks embraced completely. They didn't separate medicine from meaning. If it soothed the body and soothed the soul, that was enough. And wine bridged the gap. A philosopher nearby groans about non-empirical nonsense, but then he asks for a wine poultice for his sore shoulder. You watch Mikon hand it over with a knowing smirk. You begin to understand something subtle but profound. Healing in ancient Greece was as much about experience as it was about effect. It wasn't only what the treatment did, it was how it felt, how it was offered, and whether it restored your sense of order. Your knee, now wrapped and drying, feels strangely dignified, tended to, blessed in the most grape-flavored way imaginable. And even if the wine didn't kill all the bacteria, it certainly killed some of the fear. You exhale, not from pain, from relief, because sometimes a cure isn't about fixing, it's about being noticed. You let your head lean back. The breeze touches your skin like a whisper. The cloth across your forehead breathes coolness into your thoughts. And for a moment, the world goes quiet. You wouldn't think grape juice could be dramatic, But that was before you found yourself standing barefoot in a courtyard, watching three very determined men stomp grapes like they're trying to summon Zeus himself. Squish, squish, squish. The sound is oddly satisfying, rhythmic, almost musical. You wonder if there's a dance to it. Philomenos swears there is. Each step presses out the healing, he says with a twinkle. Wine must be made with spirit, or it carries nothing but stains. You're beginning to see that wine in ancient Greece wasn't just consumed, it was crafted with ceremony. And watching it being made, so that's part of the healing too. This isn't a vineyard tour with complimentary cheese. It's closer to a ritual. The grapes are dumped into a stone basin called a lenos, and then barefoot workers, sometimes slaves, sometimes villagers, take turns treading them underfoot, slowly, repeatedly, while others sing or clap or chant softly under their breath. Not every batch is for celebration. Some is for trade, some is for storage, and some, like the one you're staring at now, is for medicine. Philomenos points to a jug resting in the shade. It's sealed with beeswax and marked with a small clay disc etched with a serpent. Temple batch, he says. That one's for the sick, made on the solstice, blessed 3 times. You're not sure if that makes it more effective or just more expensive, but either way it smells sharper, richer, like summer in a bottle left slightly ajar. You realize now how important freshness was to the Greeks. Sure, they prized aged wines for flavor, but when it came to healing, freshly crushed was often best, especially for external use. It had live spirit, they said, vital breath. You'd never thought of juices breathing, but you're in too deep to argue now. Mikon returns with a bowl of purple-stained hands. He's been helping mix the batch with a handful of dried oregano and a sprig of laurel. For purification, he says. Then lowering his voice, also to keep the flies off. The practical side of ancient wisdom. Historians have long debated how medicinal wine differed from drinking wine. Some think the only difference was what you said about it. Label it for the gods, and it became sacred. Stir in rosemary, and it became therapeutic. Warm it before applying it to a wound, and suddenly it was healing. But in this courtyard, you start to understand the deeper truth the process mattered. Watching grapes be crushed, smelling the mash ferment, hearing the footfalls and folk songs. It wasn't just production, it was participation. Healing wasn't limited to what touched your skin. It included what reached your senses. A young girl approaches with a basket of grape skins, the pulp left behind after pressing. She offers you a handful. For your face, she says. You blink. Peel of Dionysus, she adds, smiling. Before you can protest, she's already smearing a sticky mixture across your cheeks, cold pulpy, slightly acidic. You smell sweet and strange. Philomenos claps his hands. Now your soul can wrinkle less. You try not to laugh, mostly because the mask is already drying. Cosmetics, sure. But in this context, it's therapy. Astringent grape skins were thought to cleanse the pores, brighten the skin, and tighten loose emotions. You've definitely never tried a facial that claimed that before. Nearby, a man is massaging his sore shoulder with a paste made from wine sediment and olive oil. Better than those fish bladders they used to recommend, he mutters. You're now in a world where grape residue is salve wine vapor, is balm, and fermentation is sacred chemistry, and it's hard not to be charmed by it. You remember how just yesterday you were sipping cautiously. Now you're basically marinated in wine, inside and out, and weirdly, you feel okay with it. The itch behind your eye is gone. The tightness in your jaw has loosened. Maybe it's placebo, or maybe it's just immersion. Because when you let a healing tradition surround you, some part of you starts to believe in it. Not blindly, but willingly. You glance at the freshly pressed juice, trickling into a clay amphora. It's vibrant, thick, and warm from the sun. Someone nearby murmurs that this batch is for moon rituals. You don't ask, but you do notice how everyone here treats the process like a secret passed down through hands and heartbeats. It's not precise, but it's intentional, and that makes it powerful. The girl hands you a warm cloth to wipe your face. The wine mask is gone, but the calm it left behind remains. You exhale. The grapes have been crushed. The healing, it seems, has just begun. You've never had to choose your wine like this before. A tray is set before you, 5 small clay cups, each filled with a different color and thickness. One is nearly clear with a golden tint, another syrupy and deep red. One smells faintly of seawater, another of pine and honey. The last has such a sour sting, you instinctively lean back. Philomenos raises his brows. "What's your mood today?" he asks, as if you're choosing a perfume. "Are you dry and cold, set warm and anxious, damp and forgetful?" You realize this is less of a wine tasting and more of a diagnostic session. You're about to learn that in ancient Greece, every wine had a personality, and every person had a temperament to match. The Greeks believed in a concept called the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your health, your moods, even your dreams were shaped by the balance of these bodily fluids, and the right wine could help correct your internal weather system. You point to the thick red wine. Philomenos winces. "That's for someone phlegmatic," he says. "Cold and sluggish. It stokes the inner fire. You're not sure that's you." Mekon gestures to the golden wine with a sharp, sour scent. "That one," he says gently. "That's for melancholy. Warms the heart, lifts the fog." You pick it up and sniff. It smells like citrus bark and burnt herbs. You hesitate, then sip. It tastes like a fireplace argument between lemon and vinegar, but strangely you don't hate it. That's when Mekon unrolls a scroll, a wine chart, and begins pointing to each type. Dry, sweet, sour, fortified, herbed, each with a purpose. Dry red for fatigue and weak blood. Sour white for sadness and indigestion. Sweetened dark for muscle soreness and spiritual chill. Aged resinous for forgetfulness and dreamy minds. New wine barely fermented for stubborn hearts and tense shoulders. You glance at the sour white again. Maybe that's your guy. Philomenos explains that wine wasn't chosen for taste alone. It was selected based on the body's needs. Hot wines for cold bodies, moist wines for dry temperaments, sweet wines for bitterness, sour for lethargy. Everything had a counterbalance. One woman recounts how she drank a spiced red for her nervous jitters and stopped dreaming of snakes for a week. Coincidence? She shrugs, maybe, but it tasted like courage. Historians agree that the Greeks truly believed in wine's ability to rebalance the humors. They had no concept of vitamins or neurotransmitters, but they understood patterns. If someone had a dry cough and sad thoughts, they'd say the black bile was overtaking the blood. If someone was overly cheerful and sweaty, perhaps too much yellow bile was boiling over. So the prescription wasn't a pill, it was a profile. You're told you run cool and thoughtful, a little too inward, perhaps overly damp in spirit. Mekon recommends a bright, acidic wine to stir the waters. Philomenos just calls it liquid lightning. You take another sip. It buzzes on your tongue like a forgotten spell. You look around and realize how individualized this all is. There's no one-size-fits-all wine, no magic vintage, just observation, conversation, and subtle suggestion. Healing in this model is a dialogue between what you are and what you consume. You watch as a young man with a limp is handed a dark wine infused with garlic. He winces, but drinks. For courage, Mekon says, and blood flow. Another woman takes a honeyed red for her sinking mind. She smiles softly, as if already halfway back to the surface. Philomenos insists this personalization is what makes wine powerful. The gods gave us grapes, he says, but man turned them into mirrors. You take another sip. The sourness no longer shocks you. It steadies you. And suddenly you feel like your thoughts have more room, like your ribs have expanded slightly to make space for something else and something brighter. You realize that here healing isn't fast. It's a gentle recalibration, a series of nudges rather than one loud cure. It's not about overpowering your illness. It's about listening to what it's trying to say. You set your cup down emptier than you expected. Philomenos refills it without a word. You don't need the scroll anymore. Your body already knows what it needs. By now, you've stopped asking what time it is. The sky is peach-colored and lazy. The cicadas are murmuring somewhere beyond the stone walls, and you've been reclining so long, you're pretty sure your spine is now shaped like an amphora. But your stomach, that's the loudest part of you today. Philomenos smiles when it rumbles. Ah, excellent, he says, as though you've passed a test. Then it's time for the digestive treatment. You expect a potion, maybe a paste. Instead, he gestures toward a long, low table draped in linen. There are olives, soft cheese figs, bursting with sweetness, and of course, wine. Several cups each paired with a dish. You're about to experience the most delicious prescription in history, the healing power of the Greek dinner party, or as they called it, the symposium. You shuffle to your side and prop yourself on one elbow, mimicking the others. Eating while lying down feels decadent and vaguely like a choking hazard, but you're assured it's optimal for digestion. Gravity is gentler when you're not rushing, says Mekon. The wine today is different, light, delicate, almost effervescent. It's been mixed with anise and a few mysterious herbs Mekon refuses to name. Trust the balance, he says cryptically, and moves on. You learn that after illness or during recovery, a carefully staged symposium was a form of digestive therapy. Not just the food, but the order of it, the pacing, the intentional pairing of wine with meals to stimulate digestion, relieve bloating, and oddly enough soothe stubborn thoughts. You raise a brow. My thoughts are stubborn. Philomenos nods solemnly. They chew too fast. The idea you're told is that your stomach isn't a machine. It's a mirror of your emotions. Tension, sorrow, impatience, all of them manifest in the gut. And wine, when mixed correctly and served with warm, soft foods, becomes a kind of digestive whisperer. You nibble on cheese, sip gently. You've never eaten more slowly in your life. Mekon murmurs that sweet red wine is excellent for binding the belly and easing excess moisture. Drier whites, especially sour ones, are used for cutting through wind a polite way of saying you've been audibly philosophical. You cough politely and sip the white. Historians agree that wine as a digestive aid was a mainstay of Greek health culture. It wasn't just a meal's companion, it was part of the meal plan. The body was believed to digest better when gladdened, when slightly warmed, and when the wine flowed in rhythm with conversation. And if conversation got too heated, a lighter wine, or less wine, or in Philomenos's case, a cheeky toast followed by a wedge of bread to sponge up the arguments. You start to see the logic slow, eating intentional sipping social warmth, and a meal that doesn't just fill, but reassures. A young boy across the room is being fed by his grandmother little bites of barley soaked in wine and honey. For his belly dreams, she says. She means digestion, but the phrasing stays with you. You glance at your cup, just enough left to coat your tongue. The sharpness has faded. Now it's soft, comforting, almost motherly. Philomenos launches into a monologue about a man who cured his lifelong constipation by sipping diluted wine while reciting poetry to his stomach. Not just any poetry, he adds. It hate to rhyme. You chuckle and sip. And somewhere in the middle of all this, you realize you haven't thought about your symptoms in an hour. Your stomach has stopped groaning. Your shoulders are loose. You feel fed but not heavy, soothed but not sedated. You feel digesting, as if that's a state of being. One older man stands, rubs his belly, and declares, "My humors have made peace." Everyone claps, including you, because in this world, digestion isn't just physical, it's spiritual, emotional, something that needs space-time and, yes, wine. You recline again. You feel warmth in your chest, weightlessness in your limbs, and a vague desire to write a haiku about figs. And as the shadows lengthen, Philomenos raises his cup and says to all that we carry, and to all that we finally let go. You raise yours and take one last sip. Night falls like a whisper, soft and complete. The crickets have taken over from the cicadas, and the air smells of distant smoke and crushed time. You've been fed, rap-sniffed, poulticed, and rebalanced. You think you might finally be done. But Philomenos appears again this time, holding a small cup cradled in both hands like it's sacred. Time for the most important dose. He says, his voice lower now. The nightcap. You raise an eyebrow. For dreams, he nods gravely. Exactly. Nightmares are the soul's indigestion. This will ease the spirit. You take the cup. The liquid inside is darker than before, almost inky. There's a sweetness, yes, but layered with bitterness, like molasses mixed with bark. You sip. It's warm, spiced with a curious aftertaste that tingles behind your eyes. You're not sure if this is medicine or a memory. Mikon joins him, carrying a bundle of dried herbs tied with grapevine twine. He throws it gently onto a small ember pit, and suddenly the air is filled with lavender myrrh and a faint thread of frankincense. Wine for the blood, he says, smoke for the breath, and dreams for the parts we can't reach. You're not just winding down, you're being guided into sleep. Because in ancient Greece, dreams mattered. A lot. They weren't just figments of the mind, they were messages from the gods, or warnings from the body. A troubled sleep could be a sign of internal imbalance, spiritual unrest, or simply an overexcited liver. And nightmares. They were considered spiritual infections, bad thoughts that needed to be purged, soothed, or rerouted. Wine played a role in this nightly ritual. It wasn't about getting drunk. It was about cleansing the path to sleep. A final cup to warm the body, to soften the edges of waking life, to carry your thoughts gently into the shadowy underworld of dreams. You lie back on a low cot as Mikon dims the last oil lamp. The stars are thick above the courtyard, and the breeze is just cool enough to pull the blankets up to your chin. Philomenos sits near your head. He's not leaving just yet. We've tried everything he says. Now it's your mind's turn. He tells you about incubation, a practice at the temples of Asclepius. The ill would sleep within the sacred grounds, having been purified by diet bathing and, yes, wine. They'd wait for dreams sent by the god himself. Some claimed to be cured by what they saw in the night. Others simply woke with a new understanding. Either way, the dream was part of the healing. Tonight, you're not in a temple, but the spirit is the same. The wine in your belly is a slow ember, now spreading warmth through your limbs. The smoke rises above your head like a veil. You're told to close your eyes and let your dreams wander, not in fear, but an invitation. You try, you drift, you see soft colors behind your eyelids, a flicker of green, a shape that could be a leaf or a memory. You're not sure? Philomenos' voice floats in again. Some dreams show us what we've forgotten, others remind us what we've survived. You let that thought settle like dust. Historians often dismiss ancient dream healing as fantasy. They argue it was placebo ritual theater or just desperate hope. But you lie there, body warm, heart quiet, breath steady, and you begin to think maybe hope is part of medicine, because you do feel better. Not just physically, not completely, but lighter. Like something is leaving your chest that didn't belong there. Worry maybe, or tension, or the ghost of last week's headache, and the wine, it's not pulling you under. It's carrying you across the thin river between waking and sleep, between pain and peace, between the body that hurt and the one that hopes to feel whole again. You let go, you fall, and for once, you don't dread where you're going. You awaken in darkness, but not the kind that weighs or frightens. This is a velvety quiet, the kind of darkness that feels padded, gentle, intentional. Your eyes flutter open, and the first thing you see is a small clay oil lamp flickering nearby, casting soft light across the courtyard wall. The second thing you see is Philomenos, sitting exactly where you last saw him now, chewing what looks like a raisin and humming softly. You dream, he asks without turning. You think back. You did. Nothing grand. A silver bowl floating on water. A face you half recognize. The taste of wine on the wind. You nod. He grins. Then we're healing. In ancient Greece, dreams weren't side effects of sleep. They were diagnostic tools. More than that, they were responses from your body, from the gods, from the deepest layers of you. And if you remembered the dream, that meant it had work to do. Philomenos offers you water, cold, clear, and served from a jug that still smells faintly of grapes. You drink slowly. Your mouth tastes like herbs and ash and honey. Your limbs feel like silk ropes, loose, alive. Mikon appears again, now wrapped in a darker cloak, and sits beside you. You've reached the middle, he says. Now comes the purification. You brace for another drink. but instead he hands you a shallow bowl of warm wine and motions for you to dip your fingers. It's not for swallowing, it's for washing. You obey, letting the wine coat your hands. It feels oddly reverent, like touching holy water. Then he takes the bowl and pours it over a small potted vine near the wall. Offer it back, he says. This is something sacred, the cycle. What you drink, you return. What heals you, you honor. And that too was a part of the Greek mindset. Wine wasn't simply for consumption. It was part of a larger rhythm, a sacred trade. The Greeks believed in purification by wine, not just physically, but morally. A soldier returning from battle might be bathed in wine. A mourner washed in diluted vintage to separate death from the living. A home sprinkled at its threshold with wine to drive away illness and unwelcome spirits. Philomenos recalls a village priest who claimed sour wine could cleanse haunted rooms, and stubborn goats, he adds with a smirk. Scholars still argue whether these purifications were practical or performative. Was it the alcohol disinfecting the air, or the ceremony calming the people? You suspect, like much else here, it was both. Mekon lights another small bundle of herbs. The smoke is gentler now, mixed with bay and rose. It doesn't command the air, it tends to it, the way a gardener coaxes knot cuts. Wine teaches us this, he says. You don't need to destroy the bad, just invite the good to grow. You're then handed a small clay token, round smooth, and painted with the outline of a grape leaf. It's warm from someone's pocket. Philomenos explains, when your body forgets again, and it will hold this, and remember what balance felt like. You smile, because you know it's true. You will forget. Life will rush back in, the aches, the tension, the meals eaten standing up, the thoughts that tighten your shoulders before you even know why. But maybe when that happens, you'll remember this. The washing, the sipping, the stories, the silence, the wine that wasn't for escape, but for return. You begin to rise, a little reluctant, to leave the low cot. Wait, Mekon says, rummaging in his pouch. He hands you a small folded scrap of parchment. Inside is a recipe. Your name written in ink, followed by a list of herbs, a type of clay cup, and the precise wine ratio that best suits your temperament. A prescription, he says. You're holding ancient medicine, not pills, not powders, just ritual written down, because healing here isn't a single act. It's a reminder, a whisper to return again and again to that center point between too much and too little, between stillness and movement, between pain and peace. You thank them. You step outside. The air is cool. Your steps are steady, and in your pocket your token warms. The wine is no longer in your cup. It's in you. You leave the courtyard and follow a winding stone path, lit only by the moon and the occasional flicker of torchlight, each flame dancing in rhythm with the pulse in your fingertips. Your sandals scuff softly against the ground. You're lighter now, not just in body but in thought. Something uncoiled during the night, and you're still not quite sure what. Ahead, a marble statue of Dionysus leans into the path, half cloaked in ivy and shadow. He's smiling, of course he is, and raising a cup that you're certain was designed just a bit too large for the sake of divine exaggeration. You stop, look at him, and whisper, "Thanks, I think." Because at this point, the god of wine madness and healing feels less like a distant myth and more like a mischievous friend who's been nudging you all night softly. Grapes first, then laughter, then sleep, then dreams. Oh, it was never just about drinking. Dionysus to the Greeks was never simply a god of intoxication. He was the god of transformation. He could unmake you, yes, but also remake you. Turn sorrow to song, pain to poetry, tension to release. And he did it all with vines and stories and a strange sense of knowing. Philomenos once said, "Wine doesn't fix you, it undoes you, so you can come back together properly." That's starting to make more sense. You come upon a small vineyard, moonlit and still. Rows of sleeping vines curve into the hillside like waves, each one heavy with memory and promise. You crouch down and run your fingers along one of the thick stems. It feels ancient, grounded, alive. This is where it begins the healing wine, not in the cup, but in the earth. The Greeks believed certain vineyards were blessed. Some grew near temples, others near springs. Some were even said to have sprouted where a god's tear hit the ground. You're not sure which kind this is, but the silence here feels sacred. Philomenos once told you about a vineyard on Naxos where the soil was so rich the grapes tasted like prophecy. You thought he was joking. Now you're not so sure. Wine grown on sacred land was said to carry special properties. Not just better flavor, but better energy, better spirit. That's why many temples of Asclepius, the god of medicine, maintained vineyards. Wine wasn't just for rituals, it was medicine grown with intention. One scroll describes how temple priests would harvest at dawn in silence barefoot, speaking blessings as they worked. The grapes were crushed and fermented slowly, often mixed with herbs grown in the same soil. It was alchemy without flames, healing through patience. You look around and wonder how much healing is just slowness, the kind of time you don't fight but enter. Like a vine growing toward light without ever asking how long it will take. You sit between two rows and lean back, staring at the stars. You've heard of vineyards of the healed places, where the sick went not for surgery but for rest. They walked barefoot among the vines. They breathed deeply. They drank just enough to soften the edges. They watched the grapes grow and remembered that healing too is gradual. Maybe that's the lesson. You don't have to bounce back. You don't have to snap into wholeness like a broken plate glued at the seams. Maybe you're a vineyard. Maybe your healing needs seasons. And maybe this too, this strange, fragrant, grape-drenched night is a kind of harvest. Philomenos finds you there a little while later, holding a small flask. Sacred vintage, he says, from temple vines, aged for silence. You don't ask what that means. You just take it. He pours a few drops into your palm. You press it to your forehead, then your lips. You're not drinking anymore. You're remembering. And as the wind stirs the vines, you whisper a thank you to the earth, to the grape, to the strange journey from pain to peace. You leave the vineyard before dawn. The sky is still the color of deep ink, with a few stars stubbornly clinging to the horizon. There's a chill in the air, not harsh, just enough to make you pull your hymation tighter around your shoulders. Your flask swings at your side full of silence-aged wine, a souvenir, a safeguard, maybe even a sacrament. Philomenos doesn't say goodbye. He just nods once solemnly, like a priest who knows you'll be back. And maybe you will. But for now, your feet carry you toward the last phase of your healing, and it's wet. You step into a steam-filled chamber, the kind the Greeks used for sweat breath and restoration. Inside, a stone tub waits half filled with warm reddish water. It smells like fermented apples, dried rose petals, and memory. Mikon gestures for you to undress and slide in. Wine bath, he says. Final rinse. You hesitate. He grins. You've drunk the god. Time to soak in him. You laugh, but you obey. The warmth hits first your legs, your back, your lungs, then the scent, then the strange texture. The water is smooth silky, but with a subtle grain from the crushed grape skins floating on the surface. Some stick to your arms, a few cling to your chest. You're not bathing in elegance, you're marinating in history. Wine baths were a rare but real Greek practice, usually reserved for the wealthy, the sick, or the very theatrical. They were used to draw out impurities, soften skin, and restore harmony to the outer layers of the self. Sometimes herbs were added: thyme, oregano, lavender. Other times oils, and always silence. This wasn't about scrubbing. This was absorption. You close your eyes and let your body float in the warmth. Your limbs hum. Your mind loosens like parchment in steam. The grapeskins stick gently to your cheek, and you don't move them. Philomenos once claimed Dionysus blessed the first wine bath himself after watching a priest rub grape must on a sore shoulder and laugh for the first time in weeks. He saw joy was medicinal, Philomenos said, so he spread it. Historians remain divided. Some suggest wine baths were strictly cosmetic, meant to give the skin a glow, a tone, a smell of luxury. Others believe there was something ritualistic about them, a form of rebirth, an undoing of the outer burdens so the soul could breathe again. You don't care which theory is correct, because in this moment you feel completely porous, like your worries are slipping out through your skin, dissolving into the reddish water, like the sorrow stored in your shoulders is seeping out into the steam, not violently, not dramatically, just leaving. Mikon sits beside the tub, eyes half closed. Do you feel it? He asks. You nod. Not everyone does, he says. Some people think healing should hurt or feel like a thunderclap. You exhale slowly. This feels like moss, like warm moss. He smiles. Nearby, another patient slips into a similar bath. She's older, humming softly. Her wine is mixed with myrrh and salt. For grief, she says quietly. The kind that clings to the bones. You soak longer than you mean to. When you finally rise, the water clings to you like second skin. Mikon offers a rough cloth, but you don't dry off completely. The warmth feels earned. Outside, the sun is just beginning to bloom at the edges of the sky. Philomenos is waiting with a cup. Not wine this time, just water. Cool, simple, real. You drink, and it tastes like a beginning. Not because the wine is gone, but because something deeper has taken root. You've spent days in Dionysus's care, drinking, soaking, listening, dreaming. You're not sure if your body is fully mended, but your being is. And as the sun rises over the vineyard, catching in the droplets on your skin, you realize the Greeks didn't use wine to escape the body. They used it to return to it, to feel it, hear it, heal it, one warm drop at a time. The sun is awake now. Its light spills across the hills, brushing over the tiled rooftops and glinting off the bronze rims of amphorae stacked neatly outside the storeroom. You sit beneath a fig tree, Wrapped in a dry robe, your skin still sticky with the scent of grape and herb. You're clean, but not just clean. Restored, somehow fuller than before. Philomenos joins you, hands you a shallow cup, not of wine, but of grape, must the thick, unfermented juice from the morning's pressing. It's sweet earthy and slightly gritty. You sip. It coats your tongue like memory. This, he says, is wine's first breath. All the healing, none of the madness. You nod. It tastes like possibility, because now you're learning that healing began before the wine, before fermentation, before aging, before rituals and recipes and ratios. The Greeks believed the grape itself in its raw form held life-giving properties. The must taken straight from the press was used for the very young, the very old, and the very weary. It was gentler than wine, nourishing, sometimes even boiled into a thick syrup called ceraion, a treatment for sore throats, fevers, and tightness of soul. You finish your cup and feel something warm settle just behind your sternum. No sting, just quiet sweetness. Nearby, a healer tends to a child with a raspy cough. She dabs wine must onto his lips and chest while whispering a prayer. It's not dramatic. It's not loud, but it's care in motion. And you realize this is where medicine begins, not in the bitter concoction or the sharp tool, but in the gentlest expression of presence. Mikon walks by with a clay jar. Inside, a mixture of old wine and vinegar steeped with garlic and thyme. For the soldiers, he says. Wound wash. You nod. You've smelled it before, sharp, acrid, effective. But you notice the contrast. Some wine sharpens, some softens. The grape holds both possibilities. You remember stories Philomenos told the night before, how vinegar wine saved entire regiments from infection, how one general refused to treat his wounds with anything else. It smelled like discipline, he said, and made the pain speak less. You wonder what your pain would say now if it could talk, or maybe it already did. In dreams, in silence, in the warmth that's been uncoiling in your chest since your first sip. You ask Mikon how he learned all this. He shrugs. I listened. You smile. Because that too is medicine. The Greeks didn't just treat symptoms. They treated stories. You were never just a body to be mended. You were a tale unfolding fluid, layered and unfinished. And wine. That was a way to listen to the parts of you that didn't have words yet. Philomenos plucks a fig and tears it open, handing you half. You eat it slowly, letting the sweetness linger. Do you know the difference between a drunk and a healer? He asks. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. The drunk forgets. The healer remembers. What hurts, what helps, what should be let go, and what should be tended. You sit in that for a while, because you remember now how the first cup burned and the second one softened, how the bandage soaked in wine dulled your ache, how the bath wrapped you in something wordless, and how somewhere in the middle of it all, you stopped feeling like a problem. You just felt human, and maybe that's the greatest healing of all. Philomenos rises. You'll leave today. You nod. Your body agrees, though your spirit might stay behind a little longer. He hands you a small sealed jar, grape must mixed with dried mint. For your breath, he says, in the mornings. Before your mind fills up again, you slip it into your satchel. The sun climbs higher. A soft breeze plays with the hem of your robe. Somewhere in the distance, someone is laughing, someone is coughing, and someone is softly singing a hymn to Dionysus. The world has not changed, but you have. And not from a miracle, not from a single sip, but from the gentle repetition of care. And as you stand to walk back toward the road flask at your side and sweetness on your tongue, you whisper a thank you to the vines. And you mean it. You're walking now downhill through the olive grove that lines the edge of the village. Your steps feel unhurried. There's no urgency in your bones, no tightness at the back of your neck, no weight in your chest, just that gentle hum of being. You pass a small shrine tucked between two cypress trees. A cup of wine has been left there half full, with a single olive floating on the surface. A whisper offering to the gods, or maybe to someone who didn't make it this far. You pause, not to pray, just to witness. Because you understand now wine in this world wasn't always for celebration. Sometimes it was for mourning, sometimes for memory, and sometimes for letting go. Philomenos used to say, every sip has a shadow. You didn't understand it at first, but now you do, because not all Greek healing was about feeling better. Sometimes it was about learning to carry what couldn't be fixed. You reach the lower fields, where grapevines stretch in neat rows, each one clipped and trained with deliberate care. There's a woman tending them older, strong hands, sun-darkened skin. She doesn't speak, but she nods as you pass. You realize she's harvesting medicinal grapes, not for feasts, not for trade, but for poultices, syrups, and slow-simmered wine vinegar used on wounds. She plucks a small cluster and holds it out to you. You eat one. It's not sweet. It's sharp, honest, alive. This is where the healing begins. You think not in the drinking, but in the growing. The vines twisted with time, the soil holding centuries of footsteps, the patient wait for fruit to ripen. You're struck by how little wine is wasted in Greek medicine. Every part is used. The juice, the skins, the seeds, the stems, even the lees, the sediment left after fermentation, is mixed into treatments for skin and scalp. It's as if they believed nothing inside the grape was worthless. And maybe that's the lesson. Nothing inside you is either. Even the bitterness, even the sediment, even the parts you'd rather leave out of the story. A young man runs past clutching a cloth-wrapped bundle. He's heading toward the healer's house. You hear a baby crying. Someone has a fever. Someone will be wrapped in warm towels, soaked in wine and thyme. Someone will feel a hand on their back. A voice saying, "You're not alone. You don't need to follow." You already know what's inside that house. Not miracles, attention, and wine. The tools of Greek medicine weren't surgical blades or glowing herbs. They were presence, patience, and the grape. Philomenos once said, "You don't heal by fixing. You heal by noticing. Pour the wine. Stay in the room." You pass through the village square now, where amphorae sit ready for transport. A merchant greets you and offers a taste of the latest blend, resinous dark and seasoned with clove. Good for winter joints, he says, and cold hearts. You laugh, sip, and nod. It does warm the ribs a little. Historians still try to dissect it all, what parts of the wine healed, what parts were imagined, what parts were simply fermented hope. But you're past needing proof. You've lived inside the answer. It wasn't about the wine itself. It was about the space around it, the hands that poured it, the breath that softened when it was held, the silence that came after. You leave the square behind. Your path now curves toward the road out of town. You feel the weight of the flask at your side, the taste of clove on your lips, and the strange, steady clarity that follows deep care. You're not cured, but you're changed. And in the distance, the wind carries the first chorus of the day's prayers to the grape, to the hand, to the sip that steadies the soul. You keep walking. The path out of the village winds past a low wall, etched with faded inscriptions, old dedications mostly. Messages from those who once passed through and found some form of peace here. Some are prayers, some are names. One simply reads, "It helped," you pause. Not to etch your own words, not yet. But you run your fingers along the stone, and for a moment you let yourself believe that what happened here might actually last, that the healing you've begun won't vanish as soon as you cross the hill. Behind you, the village begins to stir quietly. No shouts, no rush, just the soft clatter of amphora lids a broom sweeping across smooth stone, and somewhere faintly the thud of grapes being poured into a press. The rhythm continues with or without you, because healing isn't a performance, it's a cycle. You pass a donkey cart headed in the opposite direction. It's loaded with herbs, sealed wine jugs, and linen bandages, heading to another town, another soul in need. You step aside, and the driver nods once as if to say we all take turns being the one who needs it. The air is different out here, cooler. The scent of grapes fades, replaced by wild fennel and distant salt from the sea. But your satchel is heavier than when you arrived, not with goods, but with rituals, a folded parchment with your wine blend, a small clay vial of mint-syruped must, a grape leaf pressed flat between 2 pages of a borrowed scroll, and the token that smooth circle with the vine etched into it, tucked in your pocket like a heartbeat. Each item is proof that healing for the Greeks wasn't something done to you. It was something you entered into, slowly, willingly, cup by cup. You come across a fork in the road. To the left, the marketplace, the port, the fastness of return. To the right, a hillside shrine, small, forgotten, but unmistakably sacred. You choose the shrine. It's a humble thing. Whitewashed stone, a few offerings, a chipped statuette of Hygieia, goddess of health and cleanliness. No crowds, no priests, just you and the soft hush of morning. You kneel not because anyone told you to, but because your knees want to. You pour a few drops from your flask into a cracked dish at the statue's base. Not for cure, you whisper, for clarity. Because that's what the wine gave you, not escape, not erasure, but the quiet courage to look at yourself tenderly. The Greeks didn't always seek to remove pain. Sometimes they sought to understand it, to walk around it, name it, pour wine beside it, share stories near it until it softened at the edges and became something less sharp. You sit back on your heels and breathe. The sunlight has caught up with you, now brushing your arms and casting the grapevine token into a soft gold sheen in your lap. You run your thumb over it slowly. You remember what Mikon said days ago now, wine works best when taken with company and truth. You smile. You've had both. And now, as you rise, brush the dust from your knees and face the road ahead. You don't feel like someone leaving something behind. You feel like someone carrying it forward, in your limbs, in your thoughts, in the strange new way your body holds warmth. It's subtle, but it's enough. You walk for a while with no destination, only direction. The road dips gently through olive groves and rises again into the pale hills. The world is full of light, not yet harsh, just enough to gild the edges of the grass and warm the stone beneath your feet. Birds call from somewhere above, and the wind has that curious wine country scent, herbs dust, and the memory of fermentation. And just when you think the path has forgotten you, you hear footsteps. A traveler appears, cloaked, dust-covered eyes bright. She nods at you, pauses, and gestures to the shade beneath a fig tree. You sit. She opens her pack and produces a small amphora, carefully sealed with resin and wax. It bears no label, just a single etched line of poetry. May the heart soften before the wound hardens. Without speaking, she uncorks it and offers you a cup. You hesitate, but only briefly. You've learned by now this is how the Greeks talked. Not always in words, sometimes in sips. The wine is simple, earthy, a little sour, young and unashamed of it. You smile. She raises her cup toward the road and finally speaks, to the ones who walk slower now. And just like that, you understand she's been somewhere too. Maybe not the same courtyard, maybe not the same symptoms, but she's carried something. And so have you. And now you're meeting in the middle. This was part of Greek healing too, the sharing. Healing didn't stay where it happened. It traveled, inside people, across roads, through cups passed between strangers. In the symposiums, in the sanctuaries, in the back rooms of dusty inns, wine wasn't just for the wounded, it was for the witnesses. Those who stayed up late with the feverish, those who poured water between sobs, those who listened without fixing. You're one of them now. The woman her name never offered passes you a folded cloth. Inside, dried rose petals, a sprig of thyme, and a single grape seed. A kit, she says. For what? For remembering. You tuck it away, not because you need it now, but because you will. You ask where she's headed. She shrugs, wherever people forget that healing takes time. Then she stands, bows slightly, and continues down the road. No grand farewell, just a whisper of sandals on dust. You remain seated for a while, sipping the rest of the wine slowly. It's not complex, not aged, but it holds something present, like a song sung quietly, just for the one who needs it. Philomenos once told you, some wines are for celebration, some are for survival, and some are just for sitting still. You finally understand what he meant. The road calls again, but now you don't walk alone. You carry a flask, a token, a parchment, a sprig of thyme, and something softer in your spine. Because healing doesn't end, it just gets lighter to carry. You're nearing the edge of civilization now, where fields give way to rocky slopes, and the grapevines disappear behind low stone walls like old secrets. The road narrows, and with it the noise of daily life fades into silence. Only the breeze remains tugging at your sleeves, like a friend who doesn't need to speak. You stop at a stone bench beneath a cypress tree. There's nothing remarkable about it. No shrine, no inscription, just a smooth, sun-warmed slab, placed by someone who understood that walking isn't always the best way forward. So you sit, and from your satchel you retrieve the flask, the one Philomenos gave you, filled with the temple vintage, aged in silence. You uncork it, and for the first time since the first sip back in that grape-scented courtyard, you pour it not into yourself, but into the earth, a libation. Not for the gods this time, for your former self, the one who walked into that village carrying 1,000 silent discomforts, who didn't know what kind of healing they needed, who thought perhaps they'd only rest a night, take a few herbs, and be on their way again. That version of you was brave in a different way, and this offering is for them. In Greek tradition, libations were more than rituals. They were closures. Poured wine marked the end of something, sometimes grief, sometimes celebration, sometimes an illness that finally released its grip. And they weren't dramatic, just a quiet thank you for what had been survived. You speak no words, but your hand shakes just slightly as the wine touches the dirt and vanishes. That's how healing goes sometimes. What you poured into yourself, you eventually offer back. You lean against the cypress trunk and close your eyes. The wind is gentle now, as if it too understands that today needs fewer interruptions. You remember Philomenos, how he said that healing doesn't mean returning to the person you were. It means meeting who you've become. And so you do. Here, on this road. With dust on your sandals, wine on your fingertips, and breath that finally feels like it belongs to you again. In the distance, you hear a faint echo laughter, a cup clinking, or maybe just your memory folding back in on itself like parchment. You smile because somewhere others are gathering, sipping, tending, healing in their own ways. You're not there anymore, but you're not separate from it either. You carry it. And maybe one day when someone sits beside you beneath some other tree and says, "I don't know what I need," you'll smile and answer, "I have a story about a grape." Because in this world, wine is more than wine. It's a practice, a conversation, a kind of listening, and now it's yours to share. You stand, dust off the back of your robe, tuck the flask away empty now, but full of meaning, and you walk on, one sip wiser. The sun is high now, gleaming across the limestone and bouncing heat off the stones beneath your feet. You've rejoined a wider path, this one, lined with travelers' carts and wandering goats, with expressions far too knowing. No one speaks to you directly, but they nod as you pass. You wonder if they see it, the difference, if something in your posture or pace now reads as quieter, calmer, healed not in the triumphant sense, but in that stitched together and stronger at the seams kind of way. You find yourself walking beside a merchant, hauling jugs of medicinal wine, smaller amphorae, each sealed with red wax and marked with scratched-in sigils. One has a snake, another has a star, a third simply says for despair. You raise an eyebrow. Temple stock, he explains, mostly for midwives and old bones. Good for fear, too, if mixed with lemon balm. You nod. You know the recipe now. He offers you a sip from his own flask. Not for sale, he says. For conversation. You drink. It's sour, cooling, faintly minty. And suddenly you remember Mekon's words. Healing isn't always a return. Sometimes it's a redirection. Because as you walk beside this stranger, talking of grapes and gods and aching joints, you realize healing never made you static. It gave you momentum. It reminded you there's still road ahead, and you're finally strong enough to walk it. You reach a small rest station, nothing more than a shaded stone ledge and a spring trickling into a wide basin. You splash water on your face and sit with others doing the same. They talk of headaches and heartbreak, of sore backs and sleepless nights. No one speaks of miracles. But all of them carry something grape-stained on their tongues, in their packs, in their memories. And you think this is what medicine looks like in real life. Not a flash of light, not a total cure, but a community of limping pilgrims, learning how to pour and listen and stay upright anyway. Someone asks if you're a healer. You hesitate, then nod once. Sometimes you say, because maybe you are now, not with scalpels, not with scrolls, but with stories and silence and the right kind of sip at the right time. You take out your token, the smooth clay coin etched with the vine, and run your thumb across it again. It's cool, solid, familiar, and suddenly you know what you'll say when someone next asks you for help. Let's sit, let's pour, let's begin, because healing isn't a solo journey, it's a relay. And now it's your turn to pass the cup. The road eventually leads you to the sea. It always does. You stand on a rocky outcrop just above the shore wind, tangling your robe, salt brushing your lips. Below, fishermen call to each other in voices that carry like birdsong, hauling in nets that glisten with scales and mourning. You sit knees pulled to your chest and watch, because even here, far from vineyards and symposiums and sacred temples, the memory of healing lingers. You can feel it in the way the breeze moves like breath, in the rhythm of waves hitting shore like a heartbeat. You've finally learned to trust again. You reach into your satchel and pull out a small corked vial, the last of the wine Macan gave you. A tiny amount, barely a mouthful, meant for this moment. You uncork it and just hold it beneath your nose. It smells of everything you've been through, time and soil and summer heat. Patience, kindness, fermentation, in all the best ways. Then you drink. No toasts, no grand words, just a sip, and it tastes like closure. You lie back on the warm stone eyes, half-lidded, letting the sunlight press gently against your skin. Around you, life carries on. Someone laughs nearby. A gull cries overhead. And for the first time in what feels like a very long while, you don't flinch at the noise, because your body isn't bracing anymore. It's belonging. The Greeks believed that wine could reconnect the soul to the world, not by numbing it, but by reminding it of texture, the way fig bark feels in the hand, the way sea air curls into your lungs, the way even grief can have sweetness if you hold it long enough to taste it properly. Historians argue whether wine truly healed, whether it did more good than harm, whether it was divine medicine or elaborate self-medication with poetry. You don't care. You know this much. You feel whole, not invincible, not untouchable, just as able to meet the world again without shrinking from it. That's enough. That's everything. You toss the empty vial into your satchel and rise. In the distance, a traveler stands with her back to the sea head bowed over a cup. You recognize the shape of her flask. You know the smell of her steps. You pass her without speaking, but you nod. She nods back. Two healed people, still healing, still walking. You return to the road, one foot in front of the other. And though the bottle is empty, you realize something extraordinary. The medicine never was the wine. It was the pause it gave you, the ritual it offered, the stillness it allowed, and that you can carry forever. The road curves inland again, away from the salt air, into groves of almond trees, where petals drift like snow, though it's still warm. You let one land on your hand. It trembles there, weightless. You've begun to recognize the signs of the healed, not in the way they walk, some still limp, not in their speech, some still hesitate before joy, but in something quieter, an ease in the shoulders, a softness behind the eyes, a willingness to pause without apology. You stop beneath an arch of stone vines carved into the side of a crumbling wall. Someone's left a crater there, cracked, but upright, half filled with rainwater and a handful of wildflowers floating like tiny boats. You smile. Someone else walked this path before you. Maybe Philomenos. Maybe a stranger with their own quiet ache. Maybe the same soul who etched it helped into that village stone days ago. And now you understand this path isn't just yours. It's part of something continuous. The Greeks knew that healing had a rhythm, that it echoed across generations, that a wine recipe passed from teacher to student was more than taste. It was memory made potable, that a prayer whispered over a cup might outlive the cup entirely. You sit by the wall and unfold the parchment Mikon gave you, your personal blend, your spiritual prescription. You read it slowly. The herbs listed are humble, the ratios careful, but the final line is the one that matters best taken with quiet. Repeat when you forget who you are. You fold it again and tuck it deep into your satchel, not because you need it today, but because you will. Everyone forgets that they're allowed to rest, that healing is slow, that a sip in silence can speak louder than 100 shouted solutions. You hear footsteps approaching. A young man passes, head bowed, a walking stick in hand. You nod. He doesn't meet your eyes, not yet, but you see the empty cup dangling from his pack. He'll get there, and if he sits by this wall, finds the flowers still floating, reads the scratches in the stone, and adds his own, well, you've done your part, because this is how the Greeks built their medicine, not with walls, but with moments passed along. A recipe, a cup, a place to sit. You stand again. The breeze has shifted. You keep walking. And with each step you carry less pain and more of what was given. The village is far behind you now. Its grape-sweet air, its smoky courtyards, its slow, deliberate way of healing. You've re-entered the wider world, where carts rattle by without stopping, where dogs bark without reason, where people move quickly because they believe that's the only way forward. You don't move quickly. You pause often, not because you're tired, though you are, but because pausing has become part of you now. It's stitched into your pacing like the breath between verses in a hymn. At a fork in the road, you meet a woman carrying a bundle of firewood. She glances at you, notices your flask, and says only, "Ah, you've been to the wine healers." You nod. She doesn't ask what was wrong. She doesn't ask if it worked. She just offers a sliver of her bread and says, "My sister went, came back softer, softer, not stronger, not faster, not better, softer." You chew the bread slowly and realize she's right. You've returned from your healing with rounded edges, not because your pain was erased, but because it was held long enough, gently enough, that it stopped bristling. Philomenos would call it the ripple effect of quiet. That healing isn't just something that happens to you, it's something you end up offering others, even by accident. You've felt it already, in the way your eyes rest longer on people, in the way your voice lowers when you ask how are you, and you actually mean it, in the way you listen now without planning your reply. Wine taught you that, or rather, what surrounded the wine, the ritual, the sharing, the slowness, the care, the way the Greeks poured not to numb, but to notice, the way they sipped as if healing could only happen one swallow at a time. And maybe it can. You walk beside a stream now. The water babbles like someone thinking out loud. You reach into your satchel, pull out your token, and dip it into the flow. It glints, then darkens, then dries in your hand. This journey didn't give you invincibility. It gave you a way to begin again. And maybe that's all healing ever was. Not restoration, not perfection, just permission to begin again, more present, more open, more human than before. You step back onto the road. The day is almost done, but you're just getting started. The sun leans low, now heavy and golden, casting long shadows that stretch like threads across the path. You've walked far, not just in distance, but in feeling. The satchel at your side swings with quiet weight. Inside, it carries no miracles, only tokens, fragments, proof that you moved through something slowly and did not rush out the other side. Ahead, the road dips toward a grove of cypress and myrtle. You recognize the scent before the sight earth spice and the faint trace of wine-slicked bark. The grove cradles a simple structure, low stone walls, open to the air, no roof, no altar. Just a circle, a place to stop. And you do, because this is the final pause, the place where stories settle and silence says the last word. You sit on the worn bench inside the circle where dozens of others must have rested before. The stone is warm beneath you, the air still. For a long moment you say nothing, do nothing, and that feels right. You take out your folded parchment, the wine prescription. You read the last line again, best taken with quiet. Repeat when you forget who you are. You set it on the bench beside you, like leaving a note for the next traveler. And then the final ritual. You open the pouch of dried herbs, thyme, rose mint, those given to you by the silent traveler. You hold it to your chest for a moment, then scatter it into the breeze. They rise like dust, like memory, like breath returning home, because this journey has not been about drinking. Not really. It has been about the spaces wine created, for stillness, for story, for soul. You close your eyes, and in the darkness behind them, you see every room. You pass through the soft light of the symposium, Mikon's steady hands, Philomenos's crooked smile, the vineyard under stars, the bath, the shrine, the traveler's flask, the silence-aged sip by the sea. None of them healed you entirely, but together they did something more enduring. They taught you how to tend to yourself, not to erase pain, but to meet it, not to silence sorrow, but to soften it, not to escape life, but to return to it more slowly, more bravely, more whole. And as the breeze carries the last of the herbs into the darkening sky, you whisper, not as a patient, not as a poet, not even as a pilgrim, just as a person. I'm ready now. And you mean it. So now, let the road dissolve behind you. Let the wind move more slowly through the trees, like the earth itself is exhaling. There's nothing left to walk toward tonight. Nothing to fix, nothing to finish, only stillness, the kind that waits patiently at the bottom of a good cup, the kind that spreads through your ribs after someone says, it's okay to rest now. Let your thoughts drift, not because they're unwanted, but because they're no longer needed. You've thought enough. You've tried enough. Now is the part where the mind gets to be quiet. Breathe in slowly, like you're sipping something ancient and sweet. Exhale even slower, like you're letting go of a name you no longer need to carry. If your body is still hurting, that's okay. If your heart is still heavy, let it be heavy. Just promise you'll carry it more gently now, because that's what this journey gave you, not a cure, but compassion for yourself, for your slowness, for the way you sometimes fall apart on the way to coming back together. Let your jaw soften, let your hands rest, let your eyelids lower. There's nothing waiting but sleep, and that too is medicine. So go now, into dreams shaped like vineyards, into silence that smells like rosemary and rain. Let your last thought be a quiet one. Let it say, I am allowed to feel better. And let the sleep come slowly, like a cup being filled, one breath at a time,